Yeah, their manufacturing plant for transistors and diodes
In,
was at Hillsborough, New Hampshire.
okay.
Because I used to travel between Woburn and Hillsborough. I used to fly into Boston, and then and in the wintertime particularly, I remember driving up to Woburn, and then rather than tackle the roads way in the wintertime, snow and all ice up to Hillsborough, New Hampshire, they had a truck that ran between the two back and forth, and I would ride to and from Woburn. That's coming back to me now. But I really, all my dealings were with Hillsborough at that time,
Mm-hmm.
and the problems that they had. So whether Woburn continued on with their pilot line, my understanding of the situation that Woburn was kind of perhaps the experimental, and probably stayed in a pilot line type of category, whereas the major manufacturing was up at Hillsborough.
How many GPM
I'm
was,
sorry?
how many gallons per minute was Woburn?
That I don't know. I
10,
don't know.
1,000,
My clarifier
20?
was
Just
around 80 gallons per minute.
Okay. That Woburn plant, after we got them headed in that direction, I just don't remember anything about it. But from that point on, I was following and was called to Hillsborough numerous times when they had problems up there. And I also was involved with their wastewater treatment system up there. So I was running, used to fly back and forth from Syracuse to Hillsborough frequently. But we I don't remember the capacity of that system, but that was, probably in the order of, I suppose, 100 gallons a minute or
Yeah,
more.
right.
Something like that. They were making transistors and diodes, of course. They were growing the crystals and slicing them. And I can remember barrels and barrels of waste. There was only a few that they could make that had the characteristics that they wanted. And the rest of them became scrap.
Mm.
So I never really got into the intricacies of the transistors and diodes as to just what they did with them. I know they did washing and all of this type of thing, but my job was to keep the water coming and treat the wastewater. Their water up there came from a reservoir up in the mountain. They just poked a pipe in the reservoir and had, 80, 100 pounds pressure down in the village of Hillsborough.
This is Hillsborough, so they had surface water.
It was surface water, yeah.
Yeah, well, no wonder they had so much trouble.
Yeah.
Did they have a Spalding clarifier, an up-tilt flow clarifier? Don't remember.
I don't remember.
Yeah.
It seems to me, did IWT ever build a clarifier?
Later on, they were forced to. They were losing too much business because of clarifiers. But they were really late doing that. I
When
don't
did
know
they
why.
start that, do you know? My recollection is that the clarifier in Hillsborough was probably an IWT, but I don't know.
Okay.
I really
I don't
don't
remember
remember.
when IWT shifted, but they really had to shift because they were being left behind on all that stuff.
But it was a rectangular clarifier with a paddle wheel.
Okay. We made round ones and rectangular ones,
Yeah.
from little ones to enormous ones.
Mm-hmm.
I sold 6 of them to
Okay,
Eastern Coast.
we're going to move this camera over this way here. We want to hear from you, Pop, on this. You're about ready to start into something good, it sounds like. All right.
Is
Does
that
anyone
ready?
want water or anything like that?
I need some water.
All right, I'll get you some water.
I sold,
You may have to find that. There's a water fountain out there in the first kitchen, but we'll have to
Okay.
find
I'll do this. You sit down and I'll offer water.
You may have to get the cabins to find the container. And you have a water fountain out there, of course. Well, there's been a lot of water over the dam, that's for sure.
Yeah. I had great success with the Spalding clarifier. Now, Charles Spalding was a water doctor out in the Midwest, and he put his original installation, I think, in Springfield, Illinois, large clarifier with sloped sides, and then inside was like that. And Bermuda bought his patent, and so then they were able to market clarifiers. And I sold Eastman Kodak in around 1950. Lake Ontario had radioactivity in it, a little bit, not enough to scare people, but too much from film because they would streak the film, you know. And so they first bought a 60-foot diameter unit, 6 million gallons a day. And then when they found out that their regular water plant with slow sand filters would not take out the radioactivity, they shifted over and bought 6 more of these 60-foot diameter units. And we saw the site yesterday. And so they could treat 36 million gallons a day of water for Eastman Kodak that didn't have any radioactivity in it. So they were happy as hell. However, then they ran into a problem that the boxes that they put the film in started to streak the film. So then they had to buy boxes from a long ways away from Lake Ontario. But Eastman Kodak must have gone through hell because it took 6 months for me to distribute, to make those things to put in, you know. So it was because of that was a big success to me, that we could remove radioactivity, which was infinitesimal. You know, it had been a molecule of some sort and then blown apart. So the pieces were nano pieces, you
Are you
know.
still using alum for that, or?
Yeah. And we had to weight it down with some heavy clay. So we used about 15 to 18 parts of alum and 10 parts of clay. And the clay would weight the stuff down so it wouldn't carry to the surface. And because of the fact that it removed radioactivity, which was really a big worry at the time, the city of Rochester also bought 50 million gallons a day worth of precipitators. So I had 36 over here and 50 over here. And then Niagara Falls did the same thing. And Tonawanda did the same thing. So I sold 150 million gallons a day worth of precipitators within 10 years. But it all worked fine. And so when I saw you in around 55 or 56, success in clarifiers was really on my mind, you know. And so when you said you had that problem at the Woburn, I thought, God, it sounds like a clarifier maybe. I didn't know whether it would work or not. We didn't do any testing. You bought it and put it in. That's pretty wild, you know. So anyway, then I heard you say that you were really happy with it, and I thought, wow, that was great. I reported that to Bermuda, and I think that was the first time they understood how to treat New England water, because when I was in training at Bermuda, everybody talked about the terrible water in New England. They didn't know how to treat it
A lot of color in it.
Yeah, it was just a mess, you know. I didn't realize until later there was individual shallow wells that they were treating, but that was the nature of the water.
Marshy area, probably.
Yeah. So they didn't have any good supply of water. So anyway, when I went down to Texas Instruments, the plant which Bermuda had furnished to them had a clarifier. But Texas Instruments was so dumb, they didn't want to operate it. So they bypassed it. And then they had all this misery. And the misery they had was they were producing 20% product and throwing away 80%. And that's terrible. You saw some of that yourself. And and the president of the company took all of his smart people, he had 25 PhDs, and he put them in a committee and he said, solve that mess. And did they solve it? No, they didn't solve it. They tried every goddamn kind of filter they could think of, and none of them worked, because none of them were small enough to get whatever the hell was in the water, you know. And they never identified what the problem was. They just knew it was something. And so after a year of me waiting there while these bright guys farted around, you know, they finally agreed to let me, after they had tried everything, they finally gave me the factory for one day. So I sent everybody home except for the technical people. And I said, we're going to start at 9 a.m., we're going to run until midnight. And then around 12 or 1 o'clock, the water was worse. And they started to get worried. And then by 3 o'clock, it was even worse. But I had steeled myself that I'm not going to be upset by anything that happens. So all that crap I didn't pay any attention to. They said, you're going to ruin the entire factory. You're going to ruin all the piping in the factory. They were all crazy. So I said, we're going to keep going. So around 6 p.m. or 7 p.m. that night, really after we had flushed out all the crap, it started to go down. And it went down, it's been still down many years later. So the clarifier had to clean itself out before it showed what it could do. And that was really important, because otherwise TI would have had to get the hell out of Dallas. They had an enormous
Run
factory.
you out on a rail.
Yeah,
They would have had to change their water source, and there was no other water
they couldn't
source.
change their water source. That was it.
Speaking of water,
Well, I'm familiar with those kind of things that, you know, the VP says, them will all fix the problem and don't spend any money. That's usually the orders you get.
That's terrible.
Woolworth, as I understand it, is one of the first places that they took water that had organics in it, and from the very beginning, from their source, not just not pre-treated by a city, not pre-treated by a county, and took that water and purified it all the way to what we call today ultra pure. When did ultra pure water as a term come up? Were you around for that, or ultra pure water? Someone had to come up with that term.
I don't know who came up with that. It was we used to call it very pure water. VPW.
Is that what you called it, Ed? You call it high resistivity water also.
I think more high purity would, I don't remember really referring to it as pure water. I think it was more.
No, very pure came along 10 years later.
Okay.
I was not responsible for that at all.
So when you thought of very pure water, Ed, what would you think of? Measurements and conductivity, parts per billion, parts per million?
No, our thinking was in terms of megaohms. As far as the mixed bed is concerned, the 18 megaohm was, high purity water.
How long could you get 18 megohm water?
Well, when the resins are new, you can get it for any extended period of time. If you remember reading this, the original
I did.
article.
Really about mixed
Well,
beds.
you could get it for, until the thing was fouled, or you could get it until the resin was
Well,
old.
it does. There's two things happen. One is fouling, and the other is actual gradual degradation of the resin itself as it loses capacity. I think one of the important things that in the original article that I gave you for the Pittsburgh Water Conference, and there apparently hadn't been that much done on that, but the data that I presented there shows the gradual degradation, and also the fact that the as it degrades and goes from high capacity down to lower capacities, the capacity actually increases at the lower capacity.
The capacity actually increased. I promised you a copy, better than the one it's just better printed and.
Well,
That's-
this is
that's
your
tough.
paper
That's
here.
okay.
That was,
You were looking for
His paper,
his paper.
what's your pen work on?
I put an extra copy of this in here.
Yeah, there.
Right here.
Yeah, okay, there it is. What was acceptable? What was acceptable at say, the Seneca
Well,
Falls or?
Actually, we would cut them off at 1 meg. 1 meg on
So you were
purity.
making 18 meg on water,
This
and
is
you-
Rinceton. We usually put them on line at 1 meg. They would go up to 18 if the resin was in good condition and relatively new, hadn't degraded, and then it would gradually come back on the end of the cycle, come back down to 1 meg and it's taken off the line.
I see.
That
I see.
was kind of our let's see, this is superchlorination. There's resin exchange capacity. Exchange capacity, theoretical. See, here's the table here tells you that it has years of service. The theoretical salt plating capacity was say 2.7, and we read it at 3.12 actually, and after 1 year service, it was down to 2.22, which was down a full point from the new resin.
That's,
This tells you what happens with service here. Is it? But the other interesting thing on this is that as the high base resin deteriorates, the capacity for lower quality water increases.
I see
If
what
I'm
you're
making
saying.
sense.
It
to
couldn't,
you.
yeah, well, so your units would last longer, but at a lower quality.
That's right.
Yeah. So this is Roman Haas resin?
Primarily, this is all Roman Haas here yet. We used to use sometimes some Dow resin, but it was I'd say primarily we use Roman Haas.
Okay, let's go over instrumentation, because that's radically changed in the 50s too. Now, not instrumentation, measuring devices. How did you measure?
The quality of the output water was measured strictly with an industrial instruments in megohms.
Okay, all right.
That was the criteria as far as the one meg ohm was the lower limit. Went on at 1 meg. New resin would go up to 18, and then as it loaded up and came back down to 1 meg, it'd be off the line and regenerated.
Okay, all right. How long would that take?
Well, this depends upon the amount of the resin and the flow and so forth.
But I mean, how many?
You would size, you have to size the unit such that,
You regenerate once a day?
hopefully once a day or once a shift, something like that. And of course, it depends on the amount of water that you draw through it. We operated pretty much directly offline. For rinses and things like that, we used to put the water in the storage tank and then pump it from there.
Mm-hmm.
But if you wanted to maintain the high purity of the water, you virtually have to use it offline, because once you take it, expose it to air, the purity drops right down on your meter. So that and the mixed beds were particularly adapted to varying flows as well, because they could take low and high flows up to their maximum and still maintain purity.
Mixed beds as cartridges apparently were available fairly early. Were they available when you first started?
It was my understanding that I had one of the earliest mixed beds. I don't know if it was the first one or not, but it was certainly one of the early ones.
This is Seneca Falls?
Yeah. See, the problem with they were using mixed beds in cartridges,
Mm-hmm.
where they could mix them up and by hand and put them in a cartridge. But if you get a big unit, a big vessel with two resins, you've got the density of the resin has to be built into the point where you can backwash and separate the resin so that you can regenerate them within the unit.
I understand how mixed beds work.
And you have a distributor that has to be aligned in the middle of these two, cation resin on the bottom and anion on the top.
Your mixed beds, where was one upflow, one downflow regeneration?
Yes, the anion resin on the top, you put the regenerated with sodium hydroxide down through and out the distributor in the middle. The cation resin on the bottom, you use an acid. For large-size industrial units, you virtually have to use sulfuric acid. Hydrochloric's too expensive. Hydrochloric is a better acid regeneration than the sulfuric.
That's expensive.
But the sulfuric is put in the bottom, and then the sulfuric and the caustic start to neutralize each other,
Oh, okay. All right.
which helps as far as the treatment of the waste.
How did you remix? With the air?
Air, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and again, you have to have oil-free air in the plant.
Oil-free air. Oil-free air.
Absolutely. You put
Well, terrible.
oil compressed air, and you're going to be in trouble pretty sure.
How did you get how did you know you got the air out? Do you have a deaerator after the mixed beds?
Well, your air comes in at the bottom. You drain the tank down after you've regenerated the resin.
No, I mean for the air could then be absorbed by into the water, and you'd have a less pure water. How did you address that?
Well, you rinse it. First, you mix them all up with air, and then you have to rinse it until your purity comes up to the 1 meg. Then you put it on line, up, and back down, and you regenerate again.
Wouldn't it sounds to me like the exposure of the resin to air though would leave particles of gaseous gas in the resin that might show up in the water later on. Never a problem.
Well,
Okay.
you rinse, you're rinsing that out. You have to rinse quite a while
Okay.
under tank pressure to get your,
The resins are taking all those things that you're adding out.
So every single one of your plants finished with mixed bed demineralizers.
every one of the tube plants that made picture tubes had, demineralizers, absolutely.
All right.
Mixed bed.
And prior to that, was your 2-bed or 4 beds?
Well, when we started an emporium, and the first ones we started with were, and that's in this article here, we started out with 4 beds,
Mm-hmm.
and then they progressed further to sometimes additional in series, to the extent of going to 4 bed and another 4 bed to try to get the purity that you wanted. And this becomes, how far can you go with it? The advantage of the mixed beds is that you theoretically have an infinite number of these 2 beds, really.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You've got a cation, ideally you've got a cation resin and anide resin, you've got an infinite number of these in the bed.
Mm-hmm.
So basically you have an infinite number of 2 beds in the mixed bed.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the reason you get the 18 megohm water. But you can only go up so far with individual beds.
Okay.
So
So
what they used to do is they use 4 beds, and if you needed more capacity, they'd add another 4 bed in parallel. And if you needed try to get better quality, then you'd have to put another 4 beds on in
Yeah.
series.
yeah, but the mixed beds really helped. Is that?
That's right.
Yeah.
But the problem with the mixed beds, as I told you, is it was in tailoring the resin so that they would.
One would be
You had to
thicker,
have a
heavier
sharp
than the other.
separation. You couldn't have them any mix. And they really had to separate right on the line.
Yeah, right.
Right. So the mixed bed was, quite a development.
So let's see here. You said 1 megohm was good enough for picture tubes.
Right.
That's even the bigger 27-inch or for 50. I don't know what the biggest.
Yeah, it really doesn't matter if 1 megohm water and it's organic. If it's essentially organic free, that's okay.
Okay. All right.
Now, the other thing I should probably mention to you, that the black and white, as I mentioned, for the gelling and all of this, was really, from an organic standpoint, was more critical. And see, color came along in the mid-'60s. Color was, picture tube manufacturing was not as critical, particularly to the organic content, because it's a
Really?
completely different process. This is a photographic process, where you put the individual phosphors down in the photoresist, and then you have to expose what you want of each 3 different colors, and then you rinse away the part that's not exposed, so that you can end up theoretically with 3 dots of color, an infinite number of these things. The mask behind the screen has approximately 1 million holes in it,
Mm-hmm.
and you have to.
That's the blackness that you
That's
see
right.
when you're.
The black screen in front of so that the color, of course, you still, if you had excess minerals in there like copper and iron, you're still going to diffuse into with electron bombardment and so forth.
I remember my first TV was not gray and white; it was green and white.
Yeah.
You know, I had shades of green. I saw Mickey Mouse on as different shades of green. I guess
Well,
it was kind of-
sometimes they would gradually get, as the phosphor deadened, and I think to a certain extent possibly the electron bombardment drove some of the impurities into the phosphor as well. I'm not being an electronics man, I'm not that familiar with what happens, but I know under bombardment, vacuum and bombardment, a lot of things can happen, breakdown and so forth within the tube itself.
I like